This is a lock miter router bit, and it is one of the greatest ideas in modern woodworking because it does two things at once. It cuts a perfect 45-degree bevel, and it creates a mechanical joint that not only is much stronger than glue alone, but it makes it easier to glue your project together without everything slipping and sliding all over the place when you add your clamping pressure. Lock miters are used to make boxes and frames, to create hollow posts, and in many other creative ways. But a lot of folks are afraid of lock miter bits because they have a reputation for being a pain to set up. And YouTube is full of videos that promise to solve this problem, but then they proceed to way overcomplicate things. It doesn't have to be that difficult. In this video, I will show you two simple ways to set up a lock miter bit. The first will be the quickest, but it'll require a digital caliper and a digital height gauge. But the second option is also very quick and simple, and it requires no special tools at all. So stick around for both and tell me in the comments which one you think is best. Let's start with the digital version. First, I measured the full height of the bit's cutters with a caliper. Then I measured the thickness of my material. I divide both those numbers in half and I add them together. That's the height that I must set my bit above the table. Now, while this should work perfectly, I still do a test. I cut a couple inches on the end of a scrap, and then I flip it and do it to the other side. Then I cut off the end, separate the two pieces, and put them together. If the surfaces are flush, my bit height is dialed in. If they're not flush, then you're going to need to make some tiny adjustments, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment when we get to the next method. Setting the fence up for your router is super simple too. Place a workpiece against the fence and lay a ruler on the table against it. Set the fence so the edge of the cutter just barely scrapes the rule. You want to hardly feel it at all. Then lay the piece flat on the table and put your rule on top. The cutter should just barely scrape in this position as well. If it does, your fence is ready to go. If it doesn't, your bit height is off and you'll need to double check that. Now let me show you the other method, which is a little bit slower but still pretty quick, and it doesn't require any special tools. First, you'll have to find the exact center of the workpiece that you wish to cut and mark it with a fine pointed pencil. You'll have to align the center of your board with the center of the router bit's cutting area. Now, different bits may have slightly different shapes, so read your instructions, but in most cases the center point is right in the middle of the sloping edge between this point and that point. Mark it with a pencil or a fine Sharpie as best you can. You'll have to accurately align that center line with the center line on your workpiece. Set it by eye, trying your best to align the 2 points. Just get it as close as you can. Now, tentatively set the fence by placing your workpiece against it and moving the fence forward until the cutter falls just short of the lower corner of the workpiece. In this position, make a test cut about 2 inches into the end of a workpiece, then flip it over and do the same on the opposite edge. Remember to dial down the speed of your router if you're using a large version of a lock miter bit. Trim that end off, cut it in half, and slip the two pieces together as shown. If the surfaces are flush, your bit height is adjusted properly. If they're not even, you'll have to adjust your router bit half the offset and make another test cut. Now, a lot of folks ask me which way to adjust the bit, up or down. We'll look closely at this example. Focus on the side that looks just like the router bit itself. Note how the top is raised above the surface of the mating workpiece. If that dark area were the router bit, it would have to be lowered to bring the top down into the proper position. So do that. But remember, any adjustment you make affects both halves of the joint. So only move the bit half the thickness of the gap and confirm with another set of test cuts. If there's a gap like this in the seam, that means your fence isn't set properly. And that's no surprise because we just did it by eye. Once the bit is dialed in height-wise, the fence setting will be much easier. So we're just going to do it the same way as before. Turn the bit's cutter perpendicular to the fence, pointing it toward your body. Lay the workpiece against the fence and place a metal rule on the top of the router table with its edge against the workpiece. Adjust the fence until the bit's cutter just barely scrapes against the edge of the rule as you turn it. Lock your fence in place, then confirm the position by laying your workpiece on the table and placing the rule on top with its edge against the fence. It should just barely scrape in this position as well. Again, if the cutter scrapes the rule in one position but not the other, then your bit height is not centered properly and you'll have to double check those adjustments. Otherwise, it's time to make a full-length test cut. Even though we made both test cuts flat on the table during the setup process, That's not how the actual lock miter joint is cut. After running the first workpiece flat, the mating workpiece is run on its edge, but you still use the same router bit and fence settings. The result should be a perfectly fitting lock miter joint, and each time you use your bit, the process will get faster and easier.